Good afternoon. I'm Frances Melinda Ross Garner, and I lived during the pioneer times. And I want to share with you today some of the things that I had to do with food and how we ate, how we preserved our foods back then. If you had to live back then, I don't know whether a lot of you would make it or not. A lot of the foods that we ate were things that we could find. We did have gardens, but as we were traveling in covered wagons going west, we took dried beans and peas, and we took a lot of cornmeal, a lot of roughly ground flour, and along the way the men hunted. They hunted for squirrel, they hunted for rabbit, they hunted for deer. We even ate raccoons, we even ate possums, just whatever we could find, because those times were hard and they didn't have grocery stores like you have today. For instance, things that we would find in the different seasons of the year that we would, like apples. What would we do with apples so that we could have apples all year long? Well, one of the things that we would do, we would dry these apples. And I'm going to show you, a lot of times we would just lay it out on a cloth like this. Sometimes we would hang them up to dry. And I'm going to show you with the, we would slice it. And then I would get my children to help me do this. We would string the apple pieces, and then we would hang them up on the back of the wagon under the covered part, or if we had already settled, we would hang them out in not the outhouse, but the smokehouse, or we'd lay them up on top of the tin roof. But we would string them like this, or we'd put a cloth out on top of the roof and we would dry it. These apples would last all year long like this. And all we had to do was add a little bit of water and we could make apple pies. And I made some of the best fried apple pies you have ever eaten. My children loved them. Another thing that we ate, if we could find it along the way, or sometimes some of our neighbors would have fig trees. And figs are delicious, but a lot of times they wouldn't last. They don't last long. We had to dry them, and they were really, really good. Sometimes another way that we might preserve them, we might put them down in an old barrel, just like this, and we might put some salt and vinegar in there, and a lot of times we did cucumbers that way. And here's some cucumbers over here in this bowl. I've put some vegetables and fruits out, and we would just nip the ends off a little bit, and we would just drop them whole down in the barrel. And we'd pour vinegar over it and we'd pour salt. Other foods that we might find or we would grow once we settled were potatoes. We loved sweet potatoes, and then we loved the good white potato. Another food that was real easy to grow was a carrot. And those were really, really good, along with a cabbage. There are so many ways to cook cabbage, and I would boil it and put some animal fat down in it, especially if we had hogs. I'd put some of that in it. Another thing that we had a lot were pumpkins and different kinds of squash. And you know, we really liked pumpkin pie. That was really, really good. And even pumpkin cookies were really good. Green beans. were very good. And we even dried the green beans, and a lot of times the way that I would do that, I would lay them out on the cloth just like I have here, and I would put it up on the rooftop, or just lay it somewhere out in the sun, and they would dry and they would last. Another thing that we found a lot along the way, and they were delicious, wild blueberries. And the children and I would go out and we'd pick blueberries. And we would have blueberries for lunch and breakfast and supper. That was really, really delicious. Another food that we really enjoyed, and it was very easy, we would let our beans dry in the garden. And these would last all year long when they dried, and we would have them to cook from time to time whenever we felt like doing. Another thing, you were always lucky if you had a cow or if you even had a goat. And do you know why? Because they provided milk, and we needed milk to drink. And this is my old milk pitcher. And we would send the children out to the barn, and that was one of their jobs. They had to milk the cow every morning and every evening. And guess how we kept our milk cool? We didn't have a refrigerator. We would take it down to the stream below the house. Once we settled and built a house, we would take it down to the stream, and we would set the jug down in the stream, and it would keep it cool. Same thing when we wanted to preserve our potatoes or other foods, we had what was called a root cellar. Put our potatoes in there, and it would keep them cool. And they lasted longer that way. My husband and my boys may go out and kill a deer, or they might kill a rabbit or whatever. The smaller animals we could cook and we could eat in 1 or 2 meals. In fact, with my big brew of kids, I had about 16 children. It took about 10 rabbits per meal. So that was a lot of rabbits, folks. But with a deer, if my husband or one of my sons killed a deer, we couldn't eat it all at one sitting. And a lot of times we wanted to keep meat for the winter. So we would salt it and dry it out. And what I mean by doing that, this is what is called beef jerky. And we would dry it. And my husband had a smokehouse. And what he would do, he would take the meat or the animal that he was curing the meat, he would cut it off of the carcass, and he would hang it up, and every day he would go in the smokehouse and he would put salt on our meat. If it was deer, if we had killed a hog. And in fact, here's an old-timey salted ham, just like what my husband would do. And he took salt and he would rub it down really, really good with salt. And a lot of times he would light a fire and he would smoke the meat. So it would be lots of salt and it'd be real smoky with it. Another way that we cured meat, we would use these wooden barrels just like this, just like what we would make pickles in. And we would put our meat down in that. And then we would cover the meat really, really good on top with animal fat. Let's say we had killed a hog, we would take that hog fat and we'd put it all on top, and then we would cover it really, really good, and we would let it sit for several months, and our meat would cure, and it was really good to eat. And that way we had meat all winter, even when they couldn't find maybe an animal to kill. Once we killed the meat, if we wanted sausage, we had to make our own sausage. And this just happens to be my sausage grinder that I had. And you would open it up and you would put your meat in there, and then you would turn this handle. Right now it won't turn, but that really made some good sausage. And then we added spices to it. And one of my favorite spices was sage. And then I loved a lot of red hot pepper in mine too. I had to cook over the fire. This is my tea kettle. I made a lot of tea, or boiled water for tea. Okay. And I made a lot of coffee in here. And just anything. Sometimes I even made soup in it. Down here, if you can see, I don't know that I can pick it up, but it's just right there. This is my old-timey pot. And I cooked a lot of stews in there, a lot of vegetables, a lot of different kind of things I cooked, because everything I cooked had to be over the fire. Later on, once things started doing better, eventually we learned to can things. And canning is a way of preserving. We might pick pears, and then we would cut up the pears and cook them down a little bit, and then put them in jars and put them in a hot water bath and seal them. But in the very beginning, I didn't have anything like this. And it was more, maybe my mother had that. Tomatoes were another food. Pickles we canned like this, as well as in one of those wooden containers. Pear honey, pepper jelly. Anything that we could find. We would even make blueberry jelly, strawberry jellies, anything that we could find to cook. I mentioned that my children milked the cows. We couldn't go buy butter. We had to make our own. So we would skim the cream off of the top of the milk, put it into our butter churn, and then we would sit or stand and we would churn until it made butter, until it got really, really thick and it made butter. And then we put it into a butter mold and kept it cool down in the stream.